seriously, can everybody move up closer? Because we're not going to use microphones. And I'm Heiland. I'm the president and CEO of Valuetek. We're the company, we make clean room wipers and gloves. We have just located our independent testing lab at that beautiful campus that you saw in Albany. And we're going to be one of the anchor tenants in the Quad C building. And so that's my involvement. Michael and I are going to be providing some of the moderation direction. And I briefly wanted to introduce our two industry experts. The first industry expert that we have is Mackie, and he is local, literally lives down the street, and we're very fortunate to have him. He has a PhD in physical chemistry, 20 years in new product and process development. I guess when you think of Andy and his expertise, I always like to tell stories and analogies. If you can think of a building, and like the mortar in a building that kind of connects the bricks, and the copper wire that delivers the circuitry, that's kind of Andy's expertise, but on a much more complicated scale. So, you know, the paste and the connectors and the connectivity, but he's had expertise in the wafer fab industry, the electronics assembly market, and the semiconductor packaging industry. So we're really fortunate to have him. And there's going to be an opening for his position in the future because his goal is to be the Chief Technology Officer. So oftentimes people want to say, well, gee, where's there's an opening? Where's there's an opportunity? And he now is, you know, the leading global product manager with Indium locally. And so there's a job opening if somebody's looking. The second panelist that I'd like to introduce is Terry. And I had the good pleasure of meeting Terry when Valuetek was just kind of in exploratory stages. We're a West Coast company, and we're going to be moving up to upstate New York. And a colleague of mine said, well, you got to meet this guy. You got to meet Terry. He's all into the technology ecosystem. And not only is he really, he has a master's degree in chemistry, but he is really an expert in what I would call the ecosystem. And on a complete volunteer basis effort, you know, he's put together this website, the Empire State Technology Group, and he's all about connecting people, cross-collaborative technology sharing. He has a lot of experience in tool project management, process engineering, and as a device fab engineer. So, and Terry is a little bit down the road in Rochester. So, really without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to you gentlemen to share us some of your insights.
Okay. Before I start, usually when I start talking, people spend the first 30 seconds or a minute trying to work out where I'm from. I'm from England. I live locally, but I was born and raised in England, and I've been in the US about 20 years. So I hope everybody can hear me. I'm going to talk today about Indium Corporation. It's a company that's been in the news a lot recently, and just basically talking about some of the technology and increasingly some of the nanotechnology and associated technology that we're offering. Okay. Who we are, for those of you who don't know who we are a local company, and we consider ourselves to be a materials supplier, premier materials supplier into a variety of different industries, from electronics assembly, like printed circuit boards and that kind of thing, through to two industries very dear to my heart: semiconductor fabrication and semiconductor assembly, solar that Mike Fancher actually touched on just earlier, and thin film, and also in the thermal management, as well as some other emerging industries, including the medical industry and so on. But those are our primary focuses. The element indium was discovered in 1863, and Indium Corporation itself was founded in 1934. I don't mean for everybody to read all of this stuff, but it just gives you a history of how indium as a metal and indium as a company has developed over the years until in this millennium now we have lead-free solar materials, solar PV materials, and again I'm going to be talking about some of the more advanced materials that we're offering into the industry in the 2010s. We do manufacture globally, although we have a lot of facilities locally. We have facilities primarily clustered in the central New York area, and most of the materials that I'm going to be talking about are manufactured in the local area. We do have a small facility in Chicago, and Milton Keynes in the UK is our manufacturing site for Europe. We have just to give you a bit of background about the status of the company, we've been around obviously for 78 years. We have around 700 employees, I think slightly more than 700 employees at the moment. About half of them are located within this area, within 10 miles of this area. We have 10 factories and, again, global manufacturing capabilities. We're not just blowing our own horn here. There are companies of the size of, again, Mike was alluding to some of the companies that are part of the CNSE association, and Intel and Samsung are clearly two companies that are strongly involved with that. And these are just some recent awards we won based on the quality of materials that we supply. Just an example of some of the more important customers that we supply to. And our research and development department is run by Dr. Ning-Cheng Lee, who's our Vice President of Technology. And he has research facilities, primarily, again, in the Clinton, Utica area, with 9 PhDs. We have a smaller facility in Suzhou in China, and also one guy based in Chicago. And Dr. Ning-Cheng Lee actually leads the industry in surface mount technology and some of the flip chip technologies, and he lectures worldwide in soldering technology. So I'm going to take you today through a couple of the things that are very dear to my heart. First of all, the semiconductor packaging side of things. And again, Mike touched on some of the ways that we may be able to offer locally some development technologies and capabilities in terms of semiconductor packaging, which is a rapidly changing side of things. People might say it's almost a kind of the boring side of things, but actually it's turning out to be one of the more interesting sides of semiconductor manufacturing. And then I'll also be talking about what we are offering today in terms of nanotechnology, this strictly by the book nanotechnology. Just to give you a little bit about what we're offering into just the semiconductor industry, for things that touch wafers, if you're familiar with PVD targets, we're offering 18-inch physical vapor deposition targets, which are large, very specifically constructed metal blocks, defined crystal structure in a variety of different alloys. We're offering precursors for methanol or organic CVD for thin film deposition, and some of those are associated with some of the new facilities you may have heard that India has been developing in the last several years. And we also offer materials for bond fusion and solid bonds, which are on the surface of the wafer, as well as a variety of other different types of materials. I won't go into these, but as you can see, we have a variety of different technologies being offered into the semiconductor packaging side of things. All of these, it has to be said, are manufactured, again, within 10 miles of where I'm standing right now, and probably within 10 miles of where you live.
Andy, can you explain a little bit the difference between the wafer bumping and the more traditional, wire bonding?
Yeah, I am actually going to get into that.
One quick question.
Sure.
Do you get the indium chloride and gallium chloride? So that would be used in compound semiconductors? Would be your
yeah, we make the things that make compound semiconductors. Okay. We don't actually make the trimethyl gallium and so on that we sell them to others.
To them, then they would make.
And then they would, but there are certain specific requirements and so on and so forth that are required for that industry. Just to give you a little bit of a feel for what semiconductor packaging is, the area, Mike and various others here have already talked about some of these fine, very, very fine micro devices, nano devices that are present on the surface of the silicon wafer. These devices necessarily, being small, are very fragile, and you need to be able to protect them from the hard knocks of the outside world. These devices also have to be able to communicate to the outside world. And as you can imagine, if you have 2 billion transistors on a chip, you're going to need a lot of connections from those transistors and from that chip to be able to talk to the outside world, the number of I/Os, or in-outs, as you call them. Typically, traditionally, going back in decades and decades, the wire bonding technique, this is an example of some stacked chips that have been wire bonded. You can see that the edge of the chip here, in this example, has had a little metal wire solder bumps are formed on the surface of the wafer. And in flip chip, all you do is you take the wafer, you singulate it, or that is, you dice it or cut it up into individual chips in a specialized manner. You then take the chip and literally flip it. You turn it over so it's face down, and then place it on the circuit board. It's really as simple as that. There's a lot more to it, as you can imagine, but that's the basis of the process. Getting into other areas, one of my favorites is actually power semiconductor, which has some ins and outs of its own, where very large amounts of current are driven actually physically through the die, rather than passing from one location on the surface of the die to the other. And also the precursor to die stacking, which is hot packaging. Package-on-package packaging, which is where chips and packages are assembled in a Lego-like manner, where they're placed one on top of the other, and electrical current can pass in and out of these components from one to the other. Typically with the logic chip being placed right next to the substrate, and then the memory chips being placed on top of it. In fact, the A4 processor and the first iPad, and I think all the subsequent processors, have all been assembled in a hot writing process, although that is actually changing. And I know more about what Apple has coming up than probably most of the people in the room, but I can't share it with that. Right, there we go. So I mentioned that there are a lot of changes that are going on within the industry, and particularly in the packaging industry. The most exciting thing that's going on is that chips are now being placed down on top of each other. That is, rather than taking a chip, putting some stuff around it to protect it and interconnect it, and then taking those packaged chips and putting them one on top of the other in a package-on-package fashion, what's now happening is that the individual chips themselves are now being placed one on top of the other. And there's a huge number of problems associated with this. I presented this to a very, very big logic manufacturer just at the beginning of this year, and it's good to see that heads were nodding around the table as I started to talk about some of the challenges that are being seen here. What is driving this is a reduction in power usage. About 40 or 50% of the power that goes into a chip, and particularly, as I say, a portable device, is wasted in the form of heat because you have such long connections. If you can imagine, if you're going from a memory chip that's in a package on top of a logic chip, the electrical current has to go through a series of different interconnects to connect to the edge, the package, then connect to the logic package, and then go back across the surface of the package to go into the logic chip. Well, why not simply cut out the middleman of the package and just take the chips and allow them to talk to each other? And in this example, this is a picture from several years ago from IBM, but this shows a wafer. This is a silicon wafer, and the reason you can see the person's fingers here is because there are holes in the wafer. And the reason there are holes in the wafer is because you want to fill them up with material. It could be, I think, molybdenum or tungsten, or usually copper is now being used for these so-called through silicon vias, TSVs, which you're probably going to be hearing a lot more about in the coming years. Part of the technology that's enabling these TSVs is the so-called copper pillar or microbump, and I'll be talking about that. And there's a technology called 2.5D and 3D stacking. And again, I'll be talking about those in a minute. Some of the problems from a packaging perspective, these wafers are now not big, thick chunks of stuff. They're now being thin. They're actually taking these wafers, fabricating devices on them, and then polishing, sort of backside grinding these things until they're extremely thin. Some of them are now incredibly thin. The human hair, the average human hair is about 75 or 100 microns thick. The thinnest memory chips are now less than 20 microns thick. The thinnest logic chips, because they're slightly more delicate, are usually now less than 50 microns. How that's going to change in the near future, I'm not really sure. There may be some sort of fundamental limit to this. But again, you can see these wafers are no longer sort of monolithic slabs of stuff. They're now thin, flexible materials. Okay, great. Where's the problem with that? Here's one of the problems. Now, the ultra-low-K dielectric, that is what makes the clever interconnect on the very surface of the chip itself that connects these micro devices that my manufacturer was talking about with the surface of the wafer. There's a lot of copper interconnects within these And these interconnects are actually embedded within a very thin layer of what's called ULK dielectric, an ultra-low K, low-loss dielectric. As these devices get smaller and smaller, the dielectric has to go down. The problem with that is that this stuff is very fragile. It's very, very easily broken. It's a form of what's called aerogel, which means that there's a lot of gas involved in the structure, and the structures are inherently very, very fragile. So as you can imagine, what's going to happen to a very fragile structure on the surface of a wafer when you do something like that, you don't even want to think about it. Wafers are also getting bigger, and I know CNSC is right in the forefront of the development of tools and manufacturing capabilities for 450 millimeter wafers. And all of this is happening at the same time that you're seeing assembly process changes, which are going from standard reflow processes, which where reflow here just means a remelting, a reheating of the solid, through to new tools, which are called thermocompression bonding tools. I'll talk about these in a second, as well as all of the problems associated with handling very, very thin die, how do you release them from the wafer temp and so on and so forth. This slide is now a little bit dated. I know it's, some of this is a little bit science fiction-y, but this really shows the evolution of the way things have gone and will be going in the next several years. I've arbitrarily picked 2005 here for the inception of this so-called 2.5D technology. But the old style of packaging was with standard flip chip, the C4 type process. You take your flip chip, you flip it upside down, you attach it to a substrate. You might use a liquid flux material, and a flux material is something that is a kind of a liquidy or a pasty material that Indium excels in manufacturing, that can be cleaned away, and it allows the removal of oxide from surfaces. This material would then typically be washed away using a water wash process, and there would then be a capillary underfill. The capillary underfill is a polymeric material that cures after it's flowed underneath the chip in order to fill the underside of the chip and strengthen the joint between the flip chip and the green stuff underneath it, the flat green thing on the substrate. The 2.5D, I mentioned earlier about the delicacy of the ultra-low K dielectric, which is here sort of slightly represented by the grey here on the surface of the chip. As the material gets more and more delicate, obviously, exposing it to the stresses which are associated with attaching something which doesn't expand and contract very much with temperature to something like this green substrate, which does expand and contract to a great extent with temperature. You get a lot of shear stresses which can be caused simply by warming the substrate up and then cooling it down. In order to get around these problems, and these problems again only get worse as the node gets smaller and smaller, we've now moved to a copper pillar type approach. Rather than having just solder on the surface of the wafer, you now have a copper pillar, which is a true pillar of copper plated onto the surface of the wafer at each of these IOs, these interconnects here, usually with a little blob of solder plated on the tip of it. And this is then placed on a thing called an interposer. And an interposer CTE matches with the silicon. That is, it heats, when it's heated up, it contracts a little bit, and as it cools down, as it heats up, it expands. As it cools down, it contracts in exactly the same way as the silicon does, so that there is essentially no shear stress on the surface of the wafer. The interposer here essentially takes the brunt of the force. This then is connected, again I know this to the not copper pillar is here, but this is then connected down to a substrate. What's up and coming, what we know from companies like Micron and others, is that, and Samsung has already demonstrated this, is the ability of having these through silicon vias, these little copper pillars that run all of the way through the chips, to be stacked one on top of the other, on top of the logic, and then put on top of the interposer, and then put on top of the substrate. And this, again, is something that Semiconductor pads, and so you get a strong interconnect. And we also sell standard flip chip fluxes for the what we call the second level interconnect, that is the interposer to the substrate. So that's just a snapshot of some of the things that we're currently offering into that. And again, this new thermocompression bonding technique goes away from the issue of placing the chip on the substrate and then reflowing it. It actually combines a placement of the chip with a heating and compression step. And devices, difficult, actually very, very difficult to get hold of in the United States because there's very few of them. But the so-called thermocompression bonding tools are very different. They pick the chip off the wafer. Sometimes a flux dipping tray is used, and the chip is then placed on the substrate on the so-called hot plate pedestal, which is preheated, and then thermocompression bonding head sends a pulse of heat while pressure is applied to the chip, forcing it down onto the substrate. And as you can imagine, again, with very thin, very delicate structures, adding a compression step, a pressure step, is very negative for this. There we go. And just to give you a flavor of the roadmap, this is just a snapshot of one aspect of our technology roadmap. We have one of the flip chip fluxes is in use for this copper flip chip flux application with a very large wafer foundry in Taiwan, I can't mention, for a big US, we'll call it portable device manufacturer, or that's as far as we'll go. This is material that was released last year. There's already going to see volume production, and the next generation of devices from this leading manufacturer will contain, once again, Indium Corporation materials. This is just a snapshot of some of the things we're working on, and we just started a very big pathfinding project for a big US logic manufacturer, focusing primarily on 30 micron pitch copper pillar attached substrates for a variety of different applications. But again, strong interactions with some of the leaders in semiconductor fabrication and in the so-called outsourced assembly and test area, or OSAT as it's known. All right, enough about this stuff. What about the nano? We're here to talk about nanotechnology. So I'm going to tell you about something. We have other things in the pipeline that I certainly cannot talk about, but the one thing that I'm very proud of for our company is something that's strictly according to the definition nanotechnology. And nobody's actually come up with or mentioned what the strict definition of nanotechnology is. The Europeans, and I speak as a European, as usual, want to know exact definitions for things, and so they have this ISO TC 229 was set up about 5 years ago, I think, with the goal of standardizing things in nanotechnologies and understanding and controlling natural processes at the nanoscale. And here they say typically, but not exclusively, below 100 nanometers in one or more dimensions. In other words, it could be 100 nanometer thick wire. It could be a very thin film that's less than 100 nanometers, or it could be a little tiny particle that's 100 nanometers or less. So in one or more dimensions, and then using these nanoscale materials to create improved materials, devices, and systems. So 100 nanometers or thereabouts is really what these people are saying. Nanomaterials are nothing new. I think that one of the previous presenters has already touched on this, but I wanted to emphasize to people that things less than 100 nanometers have been around for probably a fair chunk of the last 13 billion years, since the Big Bang. And this goes from things like molecules. This is one of my favorite molecules. This is caffeine. And through to natural polymers. This is alginate, which is a seaweed-based polymer. Ocean spray, I was reading just the other day. The salt that forms from dried bubbles bursting in ocean spray is less than 100 nanometers, or can form crystals less than 100 nanometers. Smoke, carbon black that forms in smoke and has been used for thousands of years for cosmetics, pigments and so on, is also a nanomaterial. Volcanic ash, I think everybody knows that when the Icelandic volcano blew up a couple of years ago, hundreds of thousands of tons of particles were generated, many of them nanoparticles. And finally, beautiful things like opal. One of the reasons that opal Just going to some of the examples, we've already seen some of these very, very small transistors, some of the developments that Intel is doing in so-called 3D transistors, although frankly, transistors have always been 3D, through to buckyballs, and these so-called buckyballs, which are fluorine C60 spheres, carbon nanotubes, actual bottle bubbles. So of course these are also available naturally, but this is one formed from an artificial surfactant where the thickness of the bubble may be 100 nanometers or less. The lab on a chip technology, I think that's already been touched on to a certain extent, that where very, very fine tubes are driving fluids, enabling very fast blood analysis and very fast medical analysis, and down to things like nanowires, which are now able to form some new different kinds of screen devices and use the cost of some output devices. So a lot of different things are coming on. This is just a grab bag of some of the things that are coming in this area. Here's where Indium Corporation comes in. Here's where we say, yes, we are a nanotechnology company, because we produce a material called nanofoil. Nanofoil has been around for several years, but it's essentially a sandwich of nickel and aluminum. And for those of you who are familiar with chemistry, with the thermite reaction, it's pretty much the same kind of principle. It's a very exothermic reaction. That is, it gives off a lot of heat. By simply driving or diffusing the atoms into each other, it doesn't take a lot of activation energy to do that, but you can use just a 9-volt battery to kind of touch these things off. But it goes off instantly, and it looks like a sheet of aluminum foil, kind of slightly brittle aluminum foil, but it's still a sheet of metallic material that almost instantaneously heats up and then cools down. It gets very hot. It does get to around, I think, 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, almost instantaneously. But it then cools down very quickly because the amount of heat energy there is very small. And I know very few physicists, but the amount of heat energy within something very thin is necessarily very small, because no matter what temperature you get to, because the material itself is almost non-existent. It's very small. The final product is aluminum nickel into metallic. So you have this exothermic reaction, this reaction that gives out heat. Okay, it's manufactured in a proprietary physical vapor deposition process, a sequential vapor deposition process, where we put down first put down the aluminum, then we put down the nickel, then we put the aluminum and nickel and so on in a sandwich form. That takes a certain amount of time. And one of the key advantages is that it allows metallic bonding, and I'll talk about some of the applications in a minute. So you form a so-called nano bond with this nanofoil material. We already talked about this. By applying solder, and you can have a flux-free process that is without any organic materials. It's a local heating. That is, you don't have to heat up, for example, if you're bonding together two very large, heavy types of materials. You bond them together either by heating the whole thing up, and maybe using some kind of brazing or soldering process, or you can use something like this, where just at the point where the two materials touch, you can apply local, extremely high temperatures that then dissipate very rapidly because there's a very small amount of heat energy there. And so you get local heating of the interface. And one of the key things is that you don't get the thermal stresses. I mentioned earlier about some of the thermal stresses that can be caused in chips. A lot of other types of applications also may be subject to thermal stresses. So because you don't have a problem with CTE mismatch, because you're not heating the whole thing up, just the interface, you get around a lot of these problems with residual thermal stresses. And again, applications go from joining, very large area joining of material to be very dissimilar. One of our focuses here has been on sputtering targets. I mentioned earlier about PVD or sputtering targets. They go into a lot of thin film and semiconductor related industries, solar and so on. And also ceramic metal joining, things like mounting of armor, as you can imagine, putting armor down onto a tank, and applications of that type. If you can get around the problem of having to weld it or interface materials as well. Sometimes you need to be able to suck heat out of the part, which is where thermal interface materials play a significant role. And attaching final packaged parts as well. So something like this lid seal here, where nanofoil may be used to actually form the joint of the lid. As well as things that replace matches, what you call igniters, propellant flares, detonators, fireworks, you name it, as well as a variety of other things, including munitions. So there's a local source of heat, of very high temperature, but very little heat energy. This material has significant advantage. I wanted to end the talk by talking a little bit about how we're engaging the community, particularly engaging with the academic community. Mike and I are going to talk a little bit more often, but we already are talking through our solid signal CNSE. Wolf and I are already engaged, and Bill Durgan and I are already engaged in some good, strong discussions about the future of SUNYIT. As you can see, part of my thing is packaging. I'm hoping to work out a way where we can make that work. We have good associations with Binghamton University as well, slightly downstate. And currently exploring how we can work with Nanotech. We've been members of the Binghamton-based area consortium, which is more based on surface mount technology, that's more traditional soldering type electronics. We've been associated with that for many years. And we are people. We're a company of people. And we do a lot of different things in the local community. In fact, Nita Brown, who's in the audience, our lady from Arcon, is here. She partakes in the Right for Missing Children every year, as does our president and chief operating officer, that's Mr. Programs. We also have people who run in the Boilermaker and do the Heart Run and Walk, and that's something I took part in this year after recent hospitalization myself. And we're involved with the Kirkland Art Center and stuff like Snow Quarry and a whole bunch of other different things. So we actually do a lot of things in the community, which need to be sometimes remembered. Sometimes we get some negative flack on the press, but it's just remember, we're all people here. And for my little sort of corner of the world as well, what I've been doing is very recently actually promoting the region, both through my blog, which I know a lot of people, when I talk about blogging, a lot of people roll their eyes, and I certainly used to before I started doing it. But having about, I think it was 2 years ago, I was in Malaysia meeting a new customer in central Malaysia, where I've never been before. And the guy walked up to me and said, "Oh, hello Andy, how are you?" And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, did I meet you at a conference?" He said, "No, I read your blog." So it's one of those like, oh, people actually do read the thing, and somewhat with interest as well. So I get some very good comments about it, but it's well read. More well read, though, is Chipshell Review, which is the world's leading magazine in the area of semiconductor packaging. And I did an editorial with them just a couple of months ago, which again talked about having central New York and waiting in the wings for semiconductor assembly, and also promoting the local area in a variety of other different ways. So I'm out there also talking about, and Indium is out there also talking about the central New York area, and specifically trying to target us into my area of the world, because I'm kind of selfish that way. And I did want to finally show you that, this again is the world's largest magazine, the Chipshell Review, and we were on the cover. This is not our logo, but we kind of sneaked it onto the front cover anyway. Thank you very much for your attention.
You appreciate in the three thrusts and slot C, one of those had a picture of a 3D package.
Oh, I picked up on that. Yeah.
Not by accident.
Oh.
I'm Terry Rogelstad from the Pfeiffer Vacuum Company. You're going to get exposed to lots of physical chemists today. I also have a degree in physical chemistry and packaging people. I started my career in Endicott at IBM working on flip chip. I've also spent some time at Semiconductor Materials. My background is as an equipment engineer, building the tools to make packaging for microelectronics and semiconductor equipment. One of the things that you're going to see as you get more involved in
this kind of industry is how interrelated all of the people are and all of the companies. In my career, I've been a customer of Indium and a supplier to them now, and a customer of CNSE, and I'm also a supplier to them now. People I used to work with in California and Texas are all now moving up here to work at Semitech and at CNSE and Global Foundries. So the nature of our work is that things change very rapidly, and the way the technology is managed is changing even faster. Today I'm here wearing two hats. One is from Pfeiffer Vacuum. Pfeiffer Vacuum was a company started in 1890, made vacuum pumps to support the light bulb industry. And we're still making vacuum equipment, but while we used to be very technology focused, that is, how do you make and measure a vacuum, now we're very application focused, and I think that's the nature of many companies. I think Indium started out as a company that takes a certain metal and does something with it and makes it so they can sell it so somebody else can do something else. Now they're involved with all of the steps in semiconductor fabrication and in a lot of other things as well. We're not technology focused, we're market focused. The technology is what we do in order to meet the market need. And as a result, we move very, very rapidly. If you look at history from the beginning of time until about 1850, a person would be born and they would live out their life and they would be a farmer of sorts, manual laborer, a shopkeeper, or a soldier, and a couple of people were kings. And that was it. From 1850 till about 1970, you might change your career once or twice. Anybody that's gone to work since 1980 is going to change their career, the technology or art that they practice probably 3 or 4 times. So that leads us to a different kind of a problem, and that's the other hat I wear. I'm part of an association called Empire State Technology Group. It's a group of individuals and small companies aimed at promoting high technology business in New York. It's a very selfishly oriented group. We're the Empire State Group. That is, we like the Empire State. And so our aim is to make sure that we can have a way to make a living in the Empire State. We're a group that practices technology, not vacuum, not contamination control. And the reason that we practice technology is because I started out doing vacuum technology. I'm doing it again, but in between I did contamination control, I did project management, I did copper plating, and a whole bunch of other things. And so you have to recognize that whatever it is that your business or your personal expertise is, it has to change. And we're a group. That is, we're not very well defined, because no matter how we would define ourselves today, tomorrow that's going to change. So what we are looking at today is nanotechnology, and we have to start out with what is it. Mike addressed it. Nanotechnology is really an extension of material science. It is taking a material and trying to use it for some new purpose. Now there are microelectronic applications where we, at least some of us here, spend a lot of our career, but when you really get down to what is nanotechnology, you are talking about microelectronics, you're talking about MEMS, but then you go into all things like coatings, cosmetics, medicine, structures and materials like bridges and arrows for the hunters here. A whole variety of things, and it all gets back to some kind of chemistry. So we are faced up with a need to make an economy that suits our personal needs, unless we want to move all over the world continuously, and that gets old because I've done it. We need something that, we need to understand how to, as individuals and as companies, exist in this time of rapid change. The thing that I found is, as we've moved into the era of nanotechnology, the specialties that we practice have converged. I started out as a physical chemist. I got into vacuum technology, doing thin film deposition and things like that, because at the time that I entered the job market, that's what was needed. Later, I moved into project management and chemical plating and contamination control and a variety of other things. Well, you run into a problem there as an individual or a company. You become a mile wide and an inch deep. So what is it that you really do? How can you, as an entity in this economy, how can you be an effective contributor if you know a little bit of a lot of stuff, but you really don't know a lot about any one thing? How do you know how to apply the little gem of knowledge that's yours over into markets that you may not be aware of? That's where organizations like Semitech at a very high level or at a very local level, Empire State Technology Group comes in, or educational institutions like this one. It's very important for us as individuals or companies to be part of a group where you can come and meet people who are practicing what you do or similar things that you do, or in the markets that you're serving, but are coming at it from different points of view. It isn't like the old days when if you were a chemist, you joined the American Chemical Society and you went to work for Kodak and you were like one of my friends that just lost his job at age 52. He's a color chemist. He knows how to take chemicals, convert them into a stable compound that can be put on a substrate and maintain an image for a decade or two. I mean, that's very particular. It's very interesting, very important, until people like us made CCDs and now have an electronic way to do the same thing. Whereas people used to be able to afford to take one picture for maybe $1 or 50 cents, which meant you took a few when you went on your trip, to now you can take thousands of pictures or 10,000 pictures, and it costs you a couple bucks on a memory stick. So it's very important that we have associations like this, that we have educational systems like this, where we can come and get refreshed, to look at things new and be part of a very, very dynamic new economy. You know, it was easier back then. It's going to be much harder in the future if you're going to make a good living, and you can make a fantastic living, and your children can make fantastic livings, and they can make a fantastic living right here if you're willing to do the personal development to make your company develop. And these are the sorts of activities you have to be involved in. It's the key thing is convergence of disciplines, convergence of companies, convergence of state, local, and federal government with educational institutions, with large companies and small companies. So the opportunities are great. The foundation here in New York is fantastic, and that's a whole nother talk that I give sometimes about the incredible technical depth of New York and how everything that we need is right here, right now. All we need to do is apply it. And the Indium Company is a good example. The Remington Arms down the street, been making rifles and shotguns since 1818. Praxair in Buffalo helped develop the technology for uranium enhancement and developed air liquefaction. Pacemakers were invented in Buffalo. The batteries that power them that are implanted in people are still made there. There's a Mach 18 wind tunnel where the space shuttle was partly developed in Buffalo. There's a centrifuge, there's swinging astronauts around. What else? The fusion technology for melding hydrogen into energy is in Rochester. There's a synchrotron at Cornell. that's being transformed from a physics tool for doing physics to a tool for doing high intensity X-rays, which are used for doing pharmaceutical development. So we have all these tools, all this expertise, and the way that we're going to see how to apply them in different markets is activities like this. So let's have a talk.
Great job.
Thank you, Andy and Terry, for your thoughts. And I guess a common thread that I heard was it's a little bit counterintuitive in the high-tech space because things are happening so rapidly. It used to be that companies kind of developed everything in a silo. I think Michael alluded to this in his presentation. Andy, you alluded to it, Terry. In order to go to market quickly, you need to, in many instances, collaborate with your competitors, collaborate with the people that you work with, because there's a lot of come to me, come from me. And another kind of concept I'd like to share before we turn this into a roundtable is you can't play without an education. And this has been alluded to. I mean, look at your company. It would have been much easier for there to be local talent here, right? Not to recruit you, not to recruit, to have to relocate you. Listen to the comments that you made that, my gosh, you want to stay here. I'm a Westerner. One of our large relationships is with Intel. One of my good friends is a senior HR executive with Intel. You can't believe the pain that they go through to find people to recruit that have the talent to play. And so, I think it's really exciting. There's all this potential, there's all this collaboration. And it's great we're here in an academic setting because we really need to encourage the youth to be able to play. And the only way you can play is this is a whole new vernacular, and this just isn't an internship program. This is learning technology.
I think that's a good point. It's not just more of the same, but the more education, the way we did it in the past, is coming up with an entirely new paradigm for education that concurrently is focused and pushing forward the industrial partner to succeed in the marketplace. And I think the two, I think both comments are great ways of coming at the kind of crux of what we as a region have to deliver for everyone. Different kind of way of saying it. Anyway, that's my observation.
Any questions?
Well, I just have a comment. How do we do all this when I see the city of Utica laying off hundreds of teachers? And if we're talking education is the key, the school districts don't have enough money, and especially to stay up with the changes. I mean, I live in the village of Waterville, and they're talking about a major project just to have wireless in the building, and having trouble coming up with the $300,000 to do that. And yet, I mean, I look here and I go, oh my God, and yet I can't get a kid to get a wireless interconnection. I mean, I just see this real strange disconnect.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, I think we confronted it as an academic institution. We have, if you came to our facilities, you would look at a lithography tool that costs $85 million. So put it in relative to the $300,000 for the wireless, $85 million. For a college to sit there and go, okay, I'm going to plunk my money down on a industry tool, $85 million, so that I can educate students. Well, obviously nobody's done it, because no other university has it. So, and you can replicate that in nanotechnology across the board. All these tools are $5, $10, $15 million just for the tool, let alone the building. The building is the least of your worry. It's the equipment, and then I won't learn how to use the equipment. It's really expensive and challenging. So how did we do it? We focused on focusing on an applied kind of demonstration test bed, if you will. Okay, and that's really what we have at CNSC. It's a test bed manufacturing line. So that then when we were talking to Greg, all of a sudden we became relevant because not only can we do the research and have access to the microscopes and stuff, but he could try it out in the clean room. He could maybe even make sales to the clean room, help pay for the costs. There's a lot of carried over to the schools. Okay, let's set up a test bed for the next new ways to deliver education, right? And we're going to apply for grants. You know, maybe it's not education. Maybe it's Department of Energy to do, you know, apply this educational curricula in a school that's focusing on a specific clean energy technology, what have you. And then concurrently, you get the banks to put in a little bit. You know, you can, but if you don't create a dynamic,
Right, right.
you know, you're locked in your silo. You're kind of locked in. This is our opportunity set, and what bringing industry, university, and government together, like Terry was describing, you've now, just as the kind of Venn diagram, you've increased your opportunity set. Now it's up to us as a region to develop what do we want, what are our challenges, what is our priorities, and pick them off one by one, right? And I would say, I would submit though, let's pick our priorities to be really most important to the industrial partners first, because they're the ones that are going to increase more hiring, which will increase the tax base, which will, you know, that maybe they'll contribute a little bit of money. You know, certainly Indium is doing that in a number of community events. So it's not that everybody hasn't been doing it, it's just that they've been doing it in isolation of each other. What if we could start to coordinate to find out what's going on in your school? Oh, you want to do wireless? Oh, that's neat. You know, we've got a wireless company that's, you know, has new
Right.
technology. They want to try it out within a school environment
Exactly.
before they go to prime time. Let's set up a test bed. Let's evaluate, you know, get the bugs worked out as long as you're willing to, you know, deal with a system. Now, they still might need some money to help get it there, but they'll write down the cost by a huge amount. They'll put some people there. Maybe they'll even start to do some educational programming as part of it.
Sure.
You know, I mean, I think there's a lot of different things, but to do it means you've got to get the school administration to now allow maybe a third party on site that, you know,
Yeah.
you know.
And now you got a
Yeah,
whole
and
different area.
for lower education to develop a curricula, or to deliver curricula. I can't tell you how many schools came into us wanting to set up a nano education. And then they all went away. I mean, these were from top funded school districts. They all went away and never could really pull it off. Now, Albany City School came in. Within 6 weeks, they had gotten the state ed to sign off on it, and that's why we have the Nano High partnership with Albany City School. They had already done it with Albany Med in the past. They had done it, so they had expertise in how to reconcile state ed requirements with a curriculum. If we could take that intellectual property, if you will, and get it out to more schools,
Great.
wouldn't that be powerful?
Sure,
You know,
absolutely.
that's the opportunity here. Is a lot of the we've done isolated examples of it in Albany. Now it's time to replicate here in Utica. Now it's time to oscillate across the state, right? Ramp it up. We can deliver this to our districts.
But it takes your side to do this.
Well, yes, but
it takes both.
it
Well,
takes both.
yeah,
It takes
it
both.
takes a
If I
culture
could
change.
just make an interjection, I'm an entrepreneur, not an academia, but I'm fortunate to travel the world quite a bit. And maybe we're not answering the right question. Because I was in Seoul, Korea 4 years ago, and if you've ever been to Seoul, to get to the airport, which is out where MacArthur landed, Incheon, to the city center, that can take like 90 minutes. And there was no traffic. And I said, my gosh, what's happened? Why is there no traffic? I was there on the single biggest day for teenagers in Seoul, Korea. It's the testing day, okay? And so part of this is what you alluded to, takes everybody. It's the culture. In Seoul, they want to participate. They want to play. They want to have a ticket, right? And so it's so important that you don't go to work that day. You take your kid to test day, right? And that's the determination. You know, it's not if you're born a baker, you're going to be a baker. You can be born a baker's son and become the next CEO. But it's all about that internal culture. And it was like, wow, that really floored me. It was like, that was so important. So, I mean, I agree with you. The schools need to have the infrastructure, but guys, if we want to play, we also need to at the dinner table. It's like, well, what are we doing? And, you know, how are we going to get there? And you can't even describe it. It's just the fabric of the culture. And when I'm asking about it, they didn't, it's like, well, don't you have that in America?
And as a parent, to that point exactly, a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old,
know what you want, pretty much unstoppable, right? But it's so hard to figure that out, particularly in a free society. You know, I mean, where any option that's open, you tend to choose, you know, well, maybe no option, honestly. And so, you know, I think what the industry has done very well is it's mapped out, brought people together in the program. They bring thousands of people from industry together, and they decide what are our challenges to progress Moore's law for the next 5 to 10 years. And what that does is it lowers the risk, right? And it gives everybody validation to go back to their boards and say, if we invest money in this solution, what you presented, the market will be there. We will not lose our shirt because consensus says they want it. So what we're trying to do, I think, within the community, and the delivery of services is the same thing, but then also for our kids to say, if you spend the time to go into STEM, there is a direct roadmap. There's an outcome that you can consider. What's exciting with Nano is that same educational base. You can go into, you're not locked into, okay, you're going to be a chemist, you're going to go to a chem lab, and that's all you're going to do is turn bottles and stuff. You can go into Indium, doing packaging. You can be like Terry, basically gone through contamination control, packaging, vacuum technology. You know, you have this, I mean, in many ways, nanotech education is kind of material science. That's really where it started, and now it's broadening out to bio, and, you know, how do you apply it? Energy, you know.
I see a couple more questions out there. Can we start in the back there?
I have spent 50 years in the practice of medicine, and I can tell you, regardless of what happens in June in the Supreme Court, the future of healthcare is going to be totally different in the next decade than it has been in the past decade. And I see the application of nanotechnology where nanocells and chemotherapeutic drugs are put together, go to the cancer, and with ultraviolet or infrared, we can kill the cancer. But what do you see the application of nanotechnology in the state of New York? Because we've got some of the best medical institutions in the world in New York State. And I have been involved in Rochester primarily, but I haven't seen what I've seen today from you and you all with a wonderful presentation. I haven't seen that application in medicine.
Okay.
The future of medicine, incidentally, is genetics.
Yes.
And that's a field that you people should be able to
Well, so Janet Palou, you probably should have gone to her presentation, because she's doing biomolecular engines, motors.
Where is she?
Biomolecular things too. So, but actually we at the college had 15 faculty for biomedical alone. So it's a huge market, huge opportunity. I would say one of the challenges, Speaker Silver mentioned this year, over in many of his speeches. Buffalo invented something, I forget what it was, and it ended up being manufactured. You'd be invented, yeah, pacemaker.
Great guys, medical.
That's right, and it ended up being manufactured.
well, pacemakers were made in New York initially.
Or some product, I forget what it was, some major breakthrough, and none of the manufacturing happened here. It was
That was long ago.
Yes, and it's kind of like, well, why not? We have a lot of great, the name of Cornell, but why don't we see a huge mushroom of industrial development around Cornell?
Or Rochester.
Or Rochester. Well,
Rochester has
there is
tons of money.
Yeah, but there's also a lot of industry. But still, you need that bridge to link the research, the innovation. You need a better business model for converting that innovation into manufacturing or commercial success. People have tried to do this, incubators and different kinds of things. I think New York is unique in that we really went after those 3 phases of what I was talking about in my presentation, and put the money behind it, sustain the money behind it, and it's working. It clearly works. So, Asia, on the other hand, they've been doing this. I mean, they're in Europe. They have been doing this. So, we've got some catching up to do in this country. I mean,
We have a research facility right here in Masonic
Yep.
Medical Research Facility.
Incredible. I mean, there are so
We
many
discovered
gems.
9 genes that cause sudden death.
Yeah.
We now are making heart stem cells, and we have a technique where we don't have to go through the process of using these reagents, which
Yeah.
may have carcinogenic properties.
Yeah.
Because we now have a new technique, which incidentally we developed with the Indians. We couldn't get them over here with a visa or a passport, so we
Yeah.
spent a whole year doing this with Skype. And the problem we have is that we can't
Scale up.
we can't get this going. Upstate Medical Center, where they had a Department of Cardiology Research,
Yeah.
we trained 25 people in Utica. They all had a wonderful facility there. They were all purchased by the University of Michigan with a $150 million grant.
Right.
One guy gave $50 million. They all moved lock, stock, and barrel from Syracuse to,
So we should talk afterwards.
but
We should talk afterwards, because that's something that,
we do need.
yeah, I mean, and the
We
thing
need
is,
to
I
move.
find these things out, though, unfortunately. This is the networking and culture and proximity, you know, that I talked about in presentation.
Networking is.
It happens
is
just
very-
like Sherry, you know, we connect, I forget how we connected, but, yeah, but I think it was, you know, I think you just called. I think, oh, was it? Okay.
Yes.
It was, okay. So we connected, started talking. I find out there's this gem of a company, technology, world class, and I'm finding this across New York, upstate New York. There's a lot of world class companies, research institute, Joshua Research Center for Diabetes in Syracuse. So manufacturing, research, workforce, you know, education. We already have it, but it's got to get linked together, and you need to have some roadmap, some way to start to bring it all together.
It's called marketing.
Well, marketing is part of it, but, you know, I would say, you know, honestly, the electronics business, you know, that's what's driving the world. You know, I mean, think about our life. It's chips. And packaging is a key element of broadening the penetration of those chips into new parts of your life.
If I could just make a comment to kind of bring it back to the whole electronics thing. In the electronics space, the customers, the providers in that space are rewarded by the consumer who gets a higher quality product, a better performing product at a lower price. That's why the electronics market tends to be very, very fast moving, fast rewarding, because you won't pay $3,000 for a 42-inch plasma anymore, right? But in America, you'll still pay $10,000 for a pacemaker. The Great Batch moved to Tijuana. So, you know, there's challenges within healthcare because it's not an open market. And, you know, sometimes it's controlled differently. And so, you know, not to say that there's not opportunities in healthcare, but really CNSE has had so much success with these industrial partners because as soon as they can go to market, it goes to market and it scales and it becomes rewarded. Which isn't to say that you can't do that in healthcare, but it's just, it's more cumbersome, it's more highly regulated. You have to go through FDA and so, you know, I think the expectations have to be.
You've got the government trying to run the healthcare industry.
Well,
at least they don't run you.
Well, I think also in healthcare, the pharmaceuticals, if ever there is an industry screaming for a Semitech-like consortium, it's them, okay? But they've been protected for a long time, so they didn't need any, you know, they're kind of like, hey, we're making money even though we're not turning out new products, so we're okay. Now you do healthcare reform. Now suddenly the margins are getting slashed. Now they're not as protected. Now suddenly they're starting to scramble for like, oh man, we got to change models. Now they're finally coming in to talk to us.
They are talking to you.
Yeah, so they're trying to understand, okay, you guys have a track record, you know how to do this, the electronics industry's got all kinds of best practices in this field. How do we apply it to pharmaceuticals? How do we leverage all those chips to screen these pharmaceutical agents? How do we do, you know, so, you know, it's, the other industries have been protected for a long time, right? And what government is doing is they're taking away those protections. You know, the healthcare reform, for example, you realize insurance companies won't even be around in 10 years because they're not going to be fee for service. It's going to be you pay for that patient and you figure out how to. They're called health management or agencies.
That's where we need
That's right.
nanotechnology.
So that
go back to believing in our heritage, which is a market-driven need, meeting economic needs. The purpose of the economy is to meet economic needs. The purpose of the economy is not inputs, it's outputs. And so when we talk about having the schools do the right thing, the solution is not to go build a fancy school with lots of gadgets in it. The solution is to have what happened in Austin when Semitech and Samsung and Motorola and IBM all moved in and sucked the population dry of technicians in a 3-year period. Those people came together and they said, we need warm bodies with stuff in their head. Where are we going to get them? Because they'd already done, the reason they were in Austin is they'd already done it in Silicon Valley. There was no more warm bodies to teach. They were all working. And so what they did is they developed educational programs. Same thing is happening in Albany. So when there is a need and there is a reward, why did somebody spend $5 billion or $6 billion to build that silicon plant in Malta? It's because somebody's going to make some money.
Yeah.
You need to have a need and you have to have a reward. And the reason you don't have this happening in medicine is there is no reward. There's a need, but there's no reward because it's so highly regulated. If you regulated the chip industry the way you'd regulated medicine, we'd still be using tube radiums. So the solution is for the guy that started out here, the politicians, to realize the impediment is a government that consumes all the excess money in the state.
Absolutely.
On building schools full of nice stuff. You don't need schools with nice stuff. If you have a need, all that nice stuff will be put in there for the purpose of the output.
I would disagree. You still need government to put the nice stuff in there, because at the college, industry would have never done it on their own.
You
Right.
started, but
The state was there every step of the way.
Right.
They did it in concert. The question is, don't do it up front, do it in partnership so that you
Yeah,
put
as
the
is
right
made.
stuff in there.
yeah, because I was one of those customers,
Yeah.
and the reason that the money came, a little bit of money was spent at what was the advanced Indium technology place. And because one man, Calieros, could deliver to IBM and Motorola things that they needed, IBM and Motorola came back and said, oh, you need a little more money to put with the money you got to give us this deliverable. And so now you've got a little money and then more industry money and a little state money and a little more, but it was stepwise to meet a need. The state wasn't creating a building to create a building. The reason you got the building was to put that $80 million tool in.
So I think back to your question of education was, you need to do both. You need to do the economic development concurrently with the educational focusing and ramping and things like that.
But it's pulling.
Yeah.
It's not pushing.
Yeah.
It's pulling.
Based on the need.
Yes.
So what's the need?
Well, I thought that the congressman said it very well, that people that are in STEM make more, right? I think there needs to be a cultural awareness that in order to play in the new global economy, you need a skill set, right? I mean, everybody has, it's great to get all excited about this, but you have to have the toolbox to be able to do that.
And I
And
think-
we're not turning on enough engineers right now. We have to import engineers.
So if you look at Governor Cuomo, for example, he's really focusing on this and, driving down to catalyze these types of connections. Because we have everything we need to compete. We just need to finish the last piece to connect and focus it and implement. You know what I mean? But I think psychologically we've kind of been beaten down to think we can't do it, but we've got these assets here. They're just they need to be coordinated and integrated and have a facility that can bring these parties together. That's really what at the college I'd say that's one of the things that we played a very important role. Bring a variety of pieces together. It's not that it all happens necessarily there. I often say we're more than a couple thousand people we have there. We're the 15,000, 20,000
semiconductor fabrication is going to the same MSc. I'm not seeing that level going on within the packaging area, within the area of my particular interest. One company is doing one thing, another company is doing another thing, another company is doing another thing. And we've really seen historically, I think the 157 nanometer debacle is probably a good example of lithography, right? From about 10 years ago, it's a good example where a couple of companies went off and said, well, we're going to generate this kind of technology, and ended up creating this huge, ludicrous black hole stuff. In fact, I think the equipment, they led equipment manufacturers down the garden path. They led materials manufacturers down a certain garden path, and then turned around after many years of research and said, okay, we're not going to use this technology. Left a lot of people in the dust. Where I'm going with this is that exactly that's the reason for having this collaboration. But what I'm not seeing is within my specific area, within this specific technology area, it's very different from what CNSC is doing and focusing on, is in the packaging area, the next level up, putting things together, is of the need for a collaboration. And that's going to be driven, it's almost like the way that I think planetoids grow. I have this sort of image in my head of it. Planetoids growing where a big lump of rock sets down, another lump of rock comes next to it, another lump of rock joins up because there's gravitational attraction. And it's attracting, it's operating within this group right here, right now. But it's not going to be just simply throwing money at the problem. It's going to come from the recognition that there is a problem of non-collaboration. That people, I've already seen some companies that are going off, I've seen the labs of certain companies in countries I won't name, going off and doing some really odd things. And they're not sure about the reliability. I already showed you that there's this huge change going on within packaging, and there's no collaboration going on within the packaging area. This is a problem. This is a genuine problem that's going to lead to genuine problems down the line. Some of them possibly even in the medical field further on down the line. So there's lots of companies, again, going off doing things. The way that we get money and the way that we grow the local area is, again, by recognizing this as a problem, having this region see as a focus of providing answers to the problem. At the beginning stage, as the example about Alan Calieros actually providing something, we need Alan or the equivalent of someone who wanted to.
Well, and don't forget, he was at a university, just as SUNY. So when you look at universities are ideal neutral grounds, right? To bring companies in, to bring faculty, they can engage community. If we did what we did in a private company, they wouldn't care about clean energy necessarily. They'd only care about computer chips. They wouldn't care about bringing in the 5,000 high school kids all year long to show them what's going on. And, that's not their charter. That's not they're not empowered to do that. Universities are empowered to do a lot of different things: economic development, education, community development. A lot of different things. So back to the funding, though, the state has invested already $15 million just in the last regional round with a Quad C. The Assembly has been putting money in, so we're reaching a critical mass now to where we can, and that's already realized. Greg's company is headquartered in Arizona, so infrastructure. So these companies are beginning to come in until you create that nucleus around an established model of the educational paradigm, university model, to give everybody a place to plug in, whether it's a high school, whether it's a company, whether it's a supplier company, whether it's a device company, what have you. They need a place to plug into the mothership.
If I could just give a real quick insight, and it ties into your comment, that people, if there's a reward and a benefit, they're going to do it. And I guess I would just challenge you, everybody in the union knows the taxes are high in New York. Just let go of that thought. That's not going to take you anywhere. That's just the past. I mean, the future, what I see is really exciting. And when I tell people about Wolf, and he's a university president, and I had dinner with him, and he wants to know where my business is going, and he wants to have my could do some things in the lab, but we couldn't do that much. They didn't really want a partnership. They didn't really want collaboration. And I don't think, you're in it, so it's like you're maybe just assuming that's the way it rolls. You know, if you tried to do this at Stanford, they would say, well, anything you invent here is ours, right? It just doesn't work that way. And really what CNSE has done in the SUNY model, it's extraordinary, because you literally have industry collaborating with university, and you get this idea share, and the benefit to that is so much better than what the taxes would be, right? I don't worry about the taxes, because I'm part of this community, and it benefits me, and, you know, we're advancing at a faster rate. And you know, I know here you guys are down the road from what's happening in Albany, but I think Michael was very genuine, you know, get it to her. That thing is like a magnet, right? And if you can catch the disease for what's going on in there and spread the virus out here, you won't be talking about Texas anymore, right? You'll be talking about this $1 billion, you know, expansion. It's like, can you believe this and what's going on? Because obviously 250 companies, most of them much bigger than mine, have invested in New York because the gains are greater than the, you know, than the cost to it.
Well, that's another thing. Is go back and again focus on market and marketing. What is it that you have to sell? And the market, of course, is the high technology activity. Why is Silicon Valley in Silicon Valley? It's because the weather's nice, pure and simple. The guys from, not Noise, the guys.
Fairchild.
Those guys wanted to go live in a nice place, and they knew that was it. And so they built their one little factory there, or development thing, and everybody came around to create the infrastructure. And once you hit critical mass, well, then everybody came because of the infrastructure. New York has a nice place to live, and because the taxes on real estate are astronomical, they've depressed the real estate values. You can buy a mansion in Rochester for a third of the price of a house in Boston. Now, you're still paying the same taxes, but, you know, there's trade-offs. I came from Texas to New York. I took a big pay cut, even though I was paying the same, getting the same salary, because I had to pay more taxes. But the cost of living was lower because the economic things balance out. So focus on what you have. What you have around here is a low-cost, family-friendly, nice place to live. Getting people to move to Rochester to go to work for Kodak was practically like pulling teeth. But when Kodak started laying off, and when Bausch & Lomb and Xerox started laying off, did those people leave? Absolutely not. Every one of those people stayed. Between 1975 and 2000, Bausch & Lomb and Kodak and Xerox laid off 100,000 people. Yet the number of people working went from 300,000 to 400,000 in that metropolitan area. Once people get here, they love it. There's no place like it.
You know, another little tidbit. I was told that some of the first computer chip manufacturing was done, wait for it, in Utica. G's lab, Utica. So this could have been Silicon Valley. Unfortunately, GE didn't see any market in it, so they closed it down.
And so
The same thing happened with Delco. Delco wanted to come here,
Yeah.
but the labor costs would be too much, and we're making cotton and woolen mills.
Right.
So where'd Delco go? Rochester.
Yeah.
Question in the back?
So, more of a comment. So, we may not be Silicon Valley, but I think we're becoming a cyber valley with the Air Force Research Lab and all the activities that are surrounding. And with the linkages between cybersecurity, with the nano, with other information work that's going on in this area, I think we are beginning to get some traction for becoming a cyber valley for the country, for the world. About your analysis of it is a nice place to live, people who come here don't leave, true. But one thing that I think we really need to focus on with these partnerships is actually, we are beginning to do this, by the way, creating education infrastructure. New York is a great exporter of graduates. We import a lot of students from elsewhere. New York has a lot of higher education institutions, more than any other state. But education from New York, and then they leave. It would be great, and then as we're working on this, creating these as part of the economic development and having you, Valuetek, in the Indium, Intel, and other semiconductor manufacturers, as well as other new and emerging industries come to the upstate and central New York. If we create additional jobs, I know our students, after they graduate, won't leave because there is an educational opportunity here. I think some of the regional economic development council's work and the job capacity that we're building goes directly to answering that question. It is a great place to live. It's lower cost.
The state does inhibit, I think inhibit is to some degree. There are lots and lots of opportunity, and we're growing in spite of it. But if we took off the shackles, things would explode. And a good example is southwestern New York, where the shale gas is. Pennsylvania is booming. And then there's this line, and it's dead. Because of rules.
Well, let's not get into that.
There are other examples.
I saw a couple other hands up in the back.
90% of our medical residents who are trained in New York leave the state. We keep 10%.
Just to change the scope just a little bit, I'm from the construction industry, but I sit on the local Workforce Investment Board and the state board also. And chip manufacturing, Nanotech, we've been talking about it for 4 or 5 years at the state level, and Global Foundries was the biggest construction job in America when it was going. So the concern here from the local construction industry is, and you guys are the experts, are there techniques, clean room techniques? When it is built here, we want it to be built with local people. So if there's some technology that you could share with us, or maybe we need this round table, or your guys like in your stature in the industry to tell us what you see. And I know it's changing every day, but when they build it here, we want it to be built with local craftsmen, and not say, well, you know, only those people can come from California that can do that type of construction. You know, we think we got the best construction workers in the country, but if there's some training that has to be done, we will do it. And when the shovel goes in the ground, we'll be ready to man it with local workforce instead of, you know, some out-of-state plates. We don't want to see out-of-state plates doing construction work in New York State.
Yeah,
Economic development starts with the shovel in the ground, not with the permanent job. So we want to be ready.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I don't think it's just for construction. I think it even gets into like the precision cutting, for example, is a great example. There's a very big push. So the Global 450 Consortium, as an example, or the PV Manufacturing Consortium. These are very huge demarcations in an industry's development of the suppliers, what have you. So there's no necessarily, there hasn't been a chosen leader or what have you yet. So there's an opportunity to intersect that market roadmap, if you will, for new entrants or what have you. In the construction area, great example is in our local company is a crane company. And they developed the expertise in how to build cranes within the clean environment. And you can see a small crane over one lithography tool in our clean room, and then a bigger crane. And then when you go over to the new X building, 2 huge cranes, as you know, the infrastructure inside the building is higher than this auditorium is. And that same company up in Boston Spa is building. So you're absolutely right. HVAC, for example, that extra training and understanding what's required for the clean environment. And so that's something Terry and I have been working on.
Being done in that.
Yes, up at Saratoga, and also over at the Arsenal, we do have a trades unions training center.
Yeah, I'm from the trade union, so
Yeah,
I know that
so
what
you
they're
know-
doing down
you know
there is
that,
great. We want to be able to duplicate it here.
Right.
So any
And start
input
to
from
set
you
that
guys,
up.
we will build the training modules to reflect the work site in our training facilities, but we just, if it changes, if you think this meeting should happen with construction.
This is what we wanted out of the meeting, is this exact kind of input. This is great.
Okay.
Just to add on to that, our training buying orbital welders to teach our guys to do the orbital welding on the tubing method. So we're trying to get ahead of the game, so if it does come here, but, you know, it's costing us money to do that.
Well, I know when AMD was deciding, the training center down over at the Arsenal was up and running 2 or 3 years before that decision. So when they have a whole list of, when they go to choose a region, they tick down through. That was one of the ticks, was trained workforce for the trades that could build the building, hook up the tools. You know, that comes before anything else, right? Because you got to build the building first. You can't wait for the training to happen, so it's a chicken or egg conundrum. I think I applaud you for doing that, you know, getting out in front, because it is coming. It will come. You know, you just have to stay the course. We had a lot of people in our region for years saying, you're never going to get a chip fab, you're never going to the radio guy is still saying, the talk radio guy is still saying, they're going to go out of business, and so, you know, I think you're spot on. I know Terry and I have been working on developing this in a much more systematic way for the ancillary, the supplier elements, you know, the piping, fitting, vacuum pump, all of the pieces that go into that.
If I can just make a quick comment in relation to the semiconductor fabs. The construction phase is a very short phase, but the ongoing need of that facility is a huge phase. And I guess, you know, to the extent that you're interested, but that's a whole different business, right? But those are facility people, and I mean, if you're really serious about that, you know, get in that business. But because that's ongoing.
Understand.
Yeah, Rochester, Fosler, and Jaco, and Chase both have divisions that are devoted to this for many years. And so that capability existed there because the Xerox and Kodak and Bausch and Lomb and the pharmaceutical companies there all needed it. And so again, there was a need. The solution of the training developed in response to the need. So now there's a need here. Now the solution, which is the training facilities and the people interested in going there, is coming. So there's a natural progression once there's a need. If you built the training facility with no need, you just wasted money.
We just wanted, when he was talking about the checklist, when it got down to the workforce, we wanted to make sure that
Yep.
Mohawk Valley can check that
So we
off.
need to follow up and
I saw a couple other hands go up.